Welcome everyone to our masterclass on pricing strategy. We are joined here today by the wonderful Tom Ross, who I can't even stress that you are in such great hands today. Tom is one of our Circle experts. He shares really wonderful insights in our Circle community, specifically in our Level Up with Experts space. So I'll share a link to that later if you want to find more of Tom's content. But he's also the founder of Learn Community, where he teaches people how to build their own communities really successfully. So today we are covering pricing. So if you shared that you are at a zero right now with your confidence in pricing strategy, you are absolutely in the right place. We've got you covered. Tom will be diving into how to price your community with confidence. So whether you are revisiting your pricing strategy or you're just getting started, we're covering it all. So with that, I will hand it right over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Emma. I appreciate the kind intro and thank you everyone for joining. I really appreciate you being here. We're going to have a super fun session. It's going to be value packed. And I have to apologize because I think we are off to a difficult technical note. For some reason, Emma, Zoom is giving me the spinning beach ball of doom.
Oh
And so
no,
we have a couple of options. I'm going to leave and rejoin if that's okay.
that's
And
okay. Do you
worst
want to send
case,
me your deck?
well, worst case, I can email you the deck and you may need to
Okay,
go through it, but I'm going to try and rejoin and see if that works. So please bear
all
with
good.
me, everyone. Zoom can be temperamental. I'll be right back.
If you are just joining, you haven't missed much yet. We were just sharing in the chat where we're joining from, how confident we are in our pricing strategy. So I would love to hear, if you are just joining us now, where you're joining from, and then scale of 1 to 10, how confident you feel in your. Hey, Tom.
Hey, fingers crossed. Maybe Zoom's going to like me more this time.
It
It seems
is so
okay.
bizarre. There's two of you on the screen, and one of you is frozen,
Oh no.
and one of you isn't. But let's roll with it. It's
That's
all
my
good.
evil twin. He hates community,
You
but
know what?
ignore him.
I'm liking this vibe for today. Let's
Okay.
let's go with it.
Cool. Well, please do let me know if you can hopefully see this. Is that showing up for everyone?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. Let me just hide some things here. Um, okay, incredible. So thank you for being here, everyone. And today we're going to jump into how to think about pricing your community. I want to preempt this session by saying this is not an exact science. Okay, so there is not some blueprint that we can follow to get an absolute to the dollar amount perfect. But what it's about is understanding some of the dynamics of pricing and trying to essentially have a bit of a guide. And so I've got some guiding principles really just to help you think about pricing so that when you do ultimately choose and pick your price point, you just feel a bit more confident about it, a bit more informed, a bit more thoughtful about it. Because what I see so many of our members at Learn Community do and so many community builders do is they almost just grab a random number out of thin air and have no confidence in it. And maybe some of the people that put 5 have done something like that or are thinking about doing something like that. So as I say, let's jump in and we're going to cover 6 pricing considerations to kick us off. So number 1 is, how much do you actually need to earn? And it may seem strange to consider this, but we all have different needs, right? For some of us, the community is like a fun hobby project. Others, it's a side hustle. Others, it's part of a wider business. Maybe some of you, it's a full-time endeavor. And I do think that this can factor into how we think about our community financials and our pricing. So think about, what percentage do you want the community to be of your total income? And do you have supporting income streams around this? And when I think about my need figure, often this is more helpful than a want figure. And for the record, this is like one of our kind of smaller lessons from the giant course that I've been releasing around community. So in the previous lesson, I basically covered things like understanding your needs versus your wants. Because there's an interesting exercise done with humans where you ask, how much money do you want? And everyone says roughly double what they got. So if you say to someone with $1 million, how much do you need? They're like, yeah, 2 million. I'd feel pretty comfortable. Doesn't matter where they're at. And so we always kind of want for more. And if we ground it in what we need, which again, generally is like our living costs, then we can start to reverse engineer from there. So it's like, okay, if you need 5K a month, and community is a big part of that, you can start to kind of think about, okay, well, maybe I need to earn 4K from the community. And then I can start to unpack that and think how many members I want to serve, and unpack that and think how much you need to price. So it's kind of good to keep in mind. The second thing is, and this is really, really important, what is the typical price point for communities in your space? And this is really a research exercise. So I would encourage you to go and try and find similar or competing communities. Maybe try and join some if you can. Just have a look at what's out there in the market. And what you're essentially trying to do with this step is you're trying to establish a low and high end to what the price range is within your market. And people do this all the time for products. I'm sure Circle have done this to some extent, right, Emma? It's like you know where you sit in the market. And I think I actually give Circle as an example in our chapter on platforms in my course, where it's like you're not the absolute like cheap free option because you plow so much into improving the platform and making it amazing, but equally you're not like the absolute most expensive by a long way either. So it's about kind of intentionally placing where you want to be perceived within the market. And generally you do want to sit somewhere in that range. So could I get some examples? And Emma, I might need you to be the comment reader if that's okay, because Zoom is melting down. I should be able to go through my slides, but Zoom hates me today. I don't know why.
All good.
Could we open it up, and are people happy to share like what field is your community in? What industry or what space? And I'm always amazed in Learn Community at the abundance of different communities. Like we've got a community builder who has a community for arborists or tree surgeons, for example.
Oh, I love that.
Like super niche, right?
We've got a ton here. We have communities for voice actors, for senior HR leaders, a community all about goal setting and productivity, a community for investors, community for emotional wellness, digital accessibility and design, professional photographers, business aviation safety, creativity courses. Let's see, writing and recovery, guided journal classes, fashion for women over 50, leadership community. Such a good range here. I love hearing these. A lot of these are really unique too.
Yeah, honestly, this is one of my favorite things about the community world is just the complete, diversity and some of the micro niches you get into. But yeah, some really, really interesting communities that we're hearing there. So I'm going to pick out one. Let's go with voice actors. I think I heard a community for voice actors. Whose community was that, out of interest, Emma?
That was, let me scroll back up. That's Paul's community.
Incredible. So Paul, what I would say is I would just go into a deep dive research exercise where you try and find every single existing community out there for voice actors. And presumably your community is a paid one if you're on this workshop. So I'm not talking about like free Facebook groups. I'm talking about other paid communities for voice actors. And for some sectors, this is like pretty easy to find. For others, you may need to really do some digging. And my advice would be to just immerse yourself in that space. And hopefully the fact you're serving this space already means you're fairly immersed. Like in the community space, I'm friends with, I know a lot of the other community thought leaders and people running communities about community and that kind of thing, because I'm in that space every day. So hopefully you have some awareness about that. I would go and write down each of the other communities in the voice actor space, and I would write down what their price point is. So some might charge monthly, some might charge annually. I tend to just do an annual total. So even if yours is monthly, you could work out how much it is annually and compare that against other communities that might just charge annually. And you're trying to, again, establish that range. So let's say in the voice actor space, maybe on the low end, it's like $20 a month or something like that. So $240 a year. And on the high end, maybe it's 10 times that. Maybe it's $200 a month, or nearly $2,500 a year. And so what you would do in that case is you're like, okay, you understand the range that lets you start to narrow down. So rather than just kind of picking something out of thin air, it's like, okay, we're already like narrowed down where we see a low and a high, and then we can start to think about where to position ourselves within that. And I'm going to get to how to do that in just a second. I can't see the comments, but does that make sense to everyone so far? Go and do the market research and then pick that low and high range.
Yeah, it sounds like that's resonating. It looks like Paul's already done some pretty good research too. He says there's two other paid communities in the space, and he shared the price points that they're at.
What are they, out of curiosity?
Yeah, he said it's $49 a month and $59 a month. So
Awesome.
pretty tight bracket there.
Yeah, it is, but that's immediately so informative, right?
For
Because
sure.
if that's giving a bit of a range, I know it's not a huge data set, there's only two, but maybe before Paul had looked into that, he might have thought, okay, well, maybe $29 a month feels right. But actually, relative to the market, you would then be perceived as the cheap option. And people may question, why is this so cheap? Why is this underpriced? Why is it so much less than the other communities? Is it less valuable? And so again, it's kind of just anchoring yourself to, what the wider market are doing to some extent.
Totally. Such a good point.
So this is an interesting one, and it can feel quite intangible, but what is the return on investment, or ROI, for members who join? They're paying for your community. What value do they get back? And I think we need to be really kind of realistic about this, because we're all passionate. We all want to serve our members. So it's very easy to say, yeah, my community is insanely valuable. It's amazing. But I find that the value can really, really vary based on the people you're serving and the space you're in and the type of community that you're running. Because I've been a member in many communities, and I've enjoyed many communities, but some have had life-changing results. Some have quantifiable, like, business benefits where I know that community's helped me make tens of thousands, if not more. And other communities have been like a fun, kind of nice to have thing in my life, but don't give me immense value. Doesn't mean it's a bad community. It just means that I would probably pay less for that experience, and I would probably pay more for the one that gave me huge tangible results. And as I've gotten my final point there, often the kind of the sector or the space you're in will dictate that price range that we covered in the previous step. And you'll see this all the time. It's like often in, finance communities or entrepreneurship communities, the price may skew a little higher. And then there may be some that are more like hobbyist communities that might naturally skew a little lower. And so having that awareness can be helpful as well. I'd be curious in the chat, how do people feel about their space? Like, have you looked at other communities? Have you got a general feel? Does it feel like, something that is staggeringly valuable and kind of tends to skew higher? Or is it something that is like, really, really lovely and a great space to be in, but maybe people aren't typically willing to invest so much?
While we wait for those responses, we have a great question from Naomi, and she's asking, what do you do when the range for competitive communities is anywhere from $0 to 10K, which is quite the range.
Yeah. So what I would do is I would discount the free communities first of all, because virtually every space has free communities. And if you're running a paid one, I don't think that's a fair comparison. I'd be curious what the 10K community is. And one of the points I'm going to get to in a second is the model, because it's very different. If that 10K community is like a intimate mastermind community, that's different than if you're running like a scalable forum. Yeah, feel free to share, please.
Yeah, so the zero communities I wouldn't discount because their pricing model depends on sponsorship, right? So we've gone in by saying like we're not going to clutter the community with sponsorship. So, but we have to be aware that there are communities that do that are after our members, right? And then on the upside is we're after very senior HR executives. So they have Chief, for example, is a great example. They charge 10K, I think, per year. So, we're not quite chief because we're at the initial stages. We don't have, hundreds of thousands of global members. But that's by design because we want the right people in the room. Like, we're very passionate about progressive thinkers. And so we actually reject members who want to come in who we don't feel have that lens.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying, Naomi. So I still think it's helpful as an anchoring exercise, because the very fact that some people are charging that highly shows what's possible. And that doesn't mean it's necessarily possible for you and I. Often the very top of the market can be commanded by people that, can drive extraordinary levels of demand. Maybe they have a huge existing audience, or the community leaders like an A-lister or celeb in that space. That's typically what you see at the top end. But again, it's helpful to kind of anchor to that and be like, well, how close to that do you feel given various parameters? And I'm going to cover this actually in just a second, how to think about some of this stuff. But please feel free to like dive back in throughout this workshop, because I want to make this as actionable as possible for everyone. But yes, like obviously that's wildly different than the example we had before, where it's like a $10 range. That's an enormous range. But it's still helpful to understand the very top and the very bottom and what you're kind of floating between. So yeah, did any comments come in, Emma, about the kind of ROI, like, how people feel about that space? Like how confident are you that people will really invest in this like quite a bit, or is it more of a kind of nice to have and a small investment for them? Oh, you're on mute, Emma.
Thank you. Classic Zoom, but folks are sharing, in Paul's case, Paul is saying that the other communities in the space have a ton of educational content and he doesn't yet. So he has a lack of confidence around that. Other people
So sorry, just to clarify, I wouldn't yet think in terms of the value that you can provide. It's more like members in this space, how valuable do they tend to, perceive communities and help around their topics. So again, to give an example, in the finance space, people generally will invest more because the return they get could be huge, right? Or entrepreneur space, if they get help with their business, it could be, enormous. Whereas there are some, communities that are kind of just for fun. And so people may invest something, but they're probably not going to invest $1,000 a month for something that's kind of nice to have. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. And it would be really good, to kind of break down in the comments, what's your gut feel when it comes to your space, to your sector that your community exists in? Is this a kind of higher ticket space or like a lower ticket, nice to have space?
Totally. Noelle just shared our space is self-care, and that's so challenging to explain the value of. Totally. Yeah, other comments above that are people mostly explaining some of the research they've done, the competitive research they've done, kind of where other communities live, how they're priced. But yeah, it'd be great to hear.
Yeah, it's an interesting point actually with the self-care space, because I would imagine there's probably quite a spectrum there as well with pricing, and we actually have a lot of Learn community members who run communities in that space. I think where it's a slightly less clear ROI for members, then the pricing can often be dictated by the community positioning. So how well can you articulate the value proposition? How well can you explain to people, the likelihood that they're going to get certain results or certain outcomes? The better you can do that, obviously, the more you can kind of increase your prices in alignment with that. But if you're muddy or unclear, then the price is just not going to convert whatever space it's in. So I touched on this before, but what model do you want for your community? Because not every community is like a booming circle forum. Like I've done mastermind coaching group type things in the past, which I still deem to be a community. You're still bringing a group of people together, and you have to think about, the model will really dictate things. If you want to cap your community at 10 or 20 people and have this very intimate experience, you're probably going to have to charge more if that's like a full-time exercise. But I also know communities that have hundreds, if not thousands of members. And if that's the model you want to go for, then, you probably can't charge the absolute highest ticket amount, because people would generally only pay that to get a much smaller, intimate experience. So again, in the spirit of making this interactive, my question to all of you would be, have you thought about how big you ideally want your community to get? And you're not allowed to answer as big as possible. because generally that isn't always the right thing. You know, if we all had 100,000 members in our community, it might be very nice initially for our bank account, but we would probably implode and that would be an operational nightmare. So I think it can often be helpful to think about constraints with that. To give you an example, I've done this exercise, and again, in the wider lessons in my course, I kind of break down how to project these things, but I believe our ceiling is going to be around 300 to 400 members at Learn Community, and we have around 200 now. So I can kind of see where it's going and how big I'd want to get it. I don't think I'd want to run it with like 1,000 members.
We have
how are people
Naomi
feeling?
saying we're bringing in cohorts of 10 to 20 max, and we can handle many cohorts. Noelle says 5K.
Wow, that's a lot.
Bama says 150 to start.
Amazing. And my follow-up question for everyone is, have you got a revenue goal? So we're talking about pricing today, but do you know how much you want to earn from your community? Because with Noelle, if she wants to earn $5,000 a month, technically she'd only need to charge $1. And I'm not advising that for the record, but I think connecting the two is very helpful, because often when I work with our members, they will start with a revenue goal and it can often be quite large. They're like, I want to earn this big amount from my community. And then when you actually break down how many members they need, and then you factor in things like churn, and over the course of a year, how many members they would have to continually attract to offset churn, they look at those numbers and go, oh, wow, that feels really intimidating. Maybe I'm underpricing. Maybe I'd do better to serve less people, charge more appropriately, and not get overwhelmed. Because remember, the less you charge, the more people you're going to have to attract. You're going to have to really ramp up the acquisition of members for your community.
Totally. Bama's saying, is this correct, Bama? You're charging 10, or you want to hit 10K a month with your 150 members. Okay. Naomi is saying, we've priced based on these goals, but now nervous we will not get enough members at our price.
Naomi, do you mind unmuting and kind of sharing some of the numbers if you're happy to? And
Yeah, no problem. So we started out, we brought in some founding members, and at first we were going to charge them, and then we said not for this year. And actually, I don't think we're going to charge them forever, because they're actually really valuable if they help us build. So we started out with a $3,500 price tag, but we gave the first quarter free because it's a new community. And now we're nervous that when we go ask for the 3,500, a bunch of people will drop. And so we're also thinking through like what's that next tier down? Like we're identifying like not the CHRO, not the Chief Human Resource Officer, but maybe one level down, and creating some cohorts for those people quickly. It was on our roadmap, but I think we might start that quicker, because I think they're more likely to pay like an $800 a year ticket with lower volumes. So this is what we're like grappling with right now. I'm sorry to monopolize the time.
please don't. I actually think it's so helpful, because often people don't talk about numbers, right? We don't talk about how much we want to earn or share these numbers publicly. So I appreciate you being really open with the group here. I hear a couple of things where I'm like, oh, wow, I really want to go talk to you separately, to be honest, because I think your assumption is right. It's probably quite unlikely that your free members are going to convert. Particularly, I think it can undermine the value of something that is worth $3,500 by giving it away for 3 months completely free. Because then people are going to look at it and be like, well, I value this thing as free, and I have done for 3 months. And that's quite a high ticket amount to then follow up with for the exact same thing. So I think there's some potential alarm bells there.
Mm-hmm.
I also, we could potentially link it up, but on my blog, I did write about tiered communities. And I'm not saying they can't work or never work, but it may be worth reading that article just to understand some of the limitations and some of the complexity and problems that can arise from having these tiers. Generally speaking, my advice is price appropriately, keep things super simple, where I've helped a few people kind of avoid too many tiers. There was one of our members had 6 tiers, and it was just insanely complex. And he then went down to 1, nailed and like dialed in his pricing, and then he could very confidently be like, here's the price is appropriate, we know who we're targeting, you get a lot of value as part of that, and it's just a very clean, simple offering. I feel like when you start adding bells and whistles and tiers and free trials and then not, like, all of this complexity kind of muddies the water. And I think if you can confidently be like, this is what we've got, it's worth this much and here's why, and find people who buy into that, it's a much simpler model.
Mhm. Yeah, that's helpful.
Cool. So yeah, definitely think about the scale. I think there was another example as well, was it, Emma, like 10,000? No, we're looking to make 10,000 from 150 members. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Cool. So in that case, it's charging $66.6666. So let's call it.
Did you do that in your
$69.
head, or do you have a calculator handy?
I wish I could lie, but definitely calculator.
I was very impressed.
I'm pretty on the sly, out of shot. I'm actually pretty bad with maths. More of a creative. Yeah. So let's call it in that case $69. There's another lesson in this module of my course where it's a slightly depressing exercise, but I get people to factor in things like operational costs and tax and refunds and all of these types of things. And I think I calculated that after all of that stuff, so our membership is $49 per month. And I think when all of that gets deducted and it gets converted with the current conversion rate to pounds, I end up with like £17, down from $49. And when I got members to do that exercise, suddenly they start looking at their price point and be like, so my actual like take home as a community owner here is like way different from what I expected. Because most people do is they say, I'm charging 49, I'm going to get 49. And obviously that's not the case. So some of these kind of financial modeling exercises can be very useful to understand where you're at with pricing. So this is a big one. Naomi, I think this was to our discussion before. What price can you realistically command? And this is where you have to get really honest with yourself and factor in things like, what is your reputation? Do you have an existing audience? And if so, is it a large and engaged audience? Do you have credibility built into your market? And can you drive a good level of demand? So, I've worked with some of our members who might not have a big audience, but they've got 250 previous coaching clients with whom they have an incredible relationship. And those coaching clients have been asking for a community. So it's like, bam, built-in demand. Therefore, the dynamics of supply and demand dictate they can charge something appropriate for the community. We have other members that have like basically no network, no connections, no audience, and no reputation, no credibility, and not a track record of selling stuff online. It doesn't mean they can't run a paid community. It just means they're not going to be able to come in at the top of the market and like command a really aggressive price point, most likely. And as I've got at the bottom here, often you will see the people at the very, very top have like a very strong brand. They could be an influencer or some kind of celebrity in the market, or their company could just be a real industry leader. So where this is a really like big question, but if you guys are happy to get vulnerable, let's share. And I'm going to go through this entire exercise and map it to my community. So I'm going to give you my honest answer, how I feel about myself for this question. But let's be honest, like, in fact, let's try and make it tangible. Out of 10, if 10 is like the absolute like industry leader, can price whatever they want, A-lister, and 0 is like a complete, noob in the market, like has, nothing of leverage really. And that's a 0. Where do you feel you are? And sorry, Emma, again, I can't see the chat.
For sure. Paul feels he's at a 6 to 7.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
What was it, Paul, who was in the space where it was 49 to 59?
Yeah, the voice actor community.
Yeah, cool.
Naomi says 7.5, probably 8 in Canada and 6 to 7 elsewhere. Shelley's at 5. Bam is at a 7. Frank is at a 1. Thank you, Frank, for your honesty. We love it.
Yeah, for sure. And you will get there, Frank. There's very intentional things you can do to raise that number.
Totally. Lenine, 0 to 2, she says realistically. Thank you, Lenine, as well. Noelle says 6.5. Jennifer says 4. Peter is at a 5. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I know this takes some vulnerability, but we really appreciate this.
Yeah, 100%. And like I say, there's no ultimate formula, but these are guiding principles. And as we start to go through these lessons, it's about starting to, in our minds, blend them together a little bit. So it might be that, we took the principle of the high and low point, the range in your market. And maybe you look at that and you say, well, it's between, I don't know, $10 and $1,000 for a year. And then you might look at that and be like, okay, well, based on my credibility and all of these factors, I feel like I'm a 5. So then it's like, okay, well, we've got an initial range that's helpful to work within. And then you're a 5, so you're somewhere like mid-market maybe. So maybe your annual membership is around $500. But then you also start thinking about the other things of, well, how big do you want this community to be? How much are you actually aspiring to earn? What's the value that you can layer on for members? And you might start shifting that number up and down, but it's about kind of just slowly refining it down to something that feels a bit more informed, rather than not thinking about any of this stuff and being like, I don't know, $500, like $200, could be anything. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. We're just guiding in, trying to combine these thoughts. And this is a tip from my friend and fellow circle expert, Jay Klaus. What price gets you excited? And I think this is a really interesting way to frame it, because if you get that feeling of excitement in your stomach every time a member signs up, it means you're probably doing something largely right. Whereas if a member signs up and it's just like, meh, you're kind of apathetic, it feels kind of flat, that's not right. And I really love how Jay frames this. I talk about a similar concept in my content, probably less eloquently than Jay, but I call it the value seesaw. And the idea is, like a seesaw, you basically want to try and get this equilibrium between you and your members. Because I see some people where they're just giving and giving and giving everything from themselves and trying to serve their members, which is admirable, but they might be drastically underpricing. And so what happens is you get an unbalanced seesaw where the members are getting all the value, the community leader is getting very little, and that's unsustainable. So generally the community leader will then get burnt out over time. They won't be able to continue it long term. They won't be able to sustain it as a community-led business. And you can even get resentful. And it's not your members' fault. It's your fault for picking that price point. But if you're really underpricing and just giving and giving yourself and then thinking, oh, I'm getting virtually nothing back, you see that imbalance. And equally, there's people on the other side. So you might get sleazy marketers who are like massively overcharging and then under delivering in their community. So they get all the value and their members get nothing. And that's terrible too. So you want to try and figure out what's that point of equilibrium where you really think about how much you're serving your members, how much you're showing up, how much you want to give them, and then try and put a value on that where you're going to be able to sleep at night and feel good about yourself. And your members are going to feel good about the value they're getting. That's what we're all striving for here. So I did promise I'm going to try and map this exercise to how I'm doing this to try and make it practical. And as I do this, try and think, how might you map some of these questions to your community? So starting with how much do I need to earn? So ideally in the future, I would like my community to make about $15,000 a month. And I've calculated that rough living costs might be around $20,000. And I know I have other income streams, so consulting, affiliates, and all this kind of stuff, which means that if I want most of my income to come from the community, maybe 3/4, about 15K feels right. So that's a good starting point that helps me to think about, okay, well, how many members might I need to hit that, and how does that sit with me? Then what is the typical price point for communities in my space? And I did some investigating, and generally it's around like 150 per year on the very low end, up to maybe a couple of thousand per year. And showing a couple of examples of this here. So it's like, okay, cool. So I've got my range. I can understand kind of where I'm at within that. And then what is the ROI for members? It's like, well, I am a firm believer that if someone invests, I don't just want to, give them a return on that investment. I want to try and 10x it. I think that's often a good way to think about how we deliver value for members. And so I really believe that with the right application of what members learn in the community, they can stand to make a huge return on what they invest. And we've seen this with various members where, a member's been helped to reduce their churn rate, and we projected out it's going to make her like 6 figures and that kind of thing, just a ridiculous return on what she got from her membership. So for the people that apply themselves, the ROI is very large, and I can feel confident in that. And then what model do I want for my community? It's like, well, as I mentioned, I've done smaller groups and coaching and that kind of thing before, but I'm really enjoying building a more scalable community, serving hundreds of members. Equally, the prospect of serving thousands of members is probably a little more than I want to deal with. I think you can run into issues around community culture. You can lose some of that intimate vibe. And so for me, the sweet spot is like perhaps several hundred members. And then what price can I realistically command? Well, I'm confident in my community building experience and business building experience. So everything I'm talking about now is actually my side hustle. My full-time job is I run a startup that's been around for 10 years. We're a community-focused startup, and I'm the CEO there. And so, I've been in the community space for quite a while. So I do believe that I could price somewhere near the top of the market. I also have an existing audience. It's a growing audience, so I can drive a level of demand. I've got great partnerships, and I can drive consistent demand through speaking opportunities and stuff like that. However, because it's a part-time project for me, I'm not comfortable pricing right at the top of the market. Yeah, because I know I could give, even more of myself if this was a full-time endeavor. So I certainly show up for our members a ton, and I'm happy with the value I deliver, but I know that I don't yet want to charge at the top of the market. So as such, I price myself more mid-market. I'm $490 for the year, so I'm not at the bottom, I'm not at the top, and I'm kind of comfortable being somewhere in between. And what price gets me excited? To be honest, where we're at now, the $49 per month or $490 per year, like every time we get a new member, we got a new member sign up like right before this workshop, and I was like, yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait to go like greet them. I feel really really excited about that. So yeah, I feel good about our price point. I also have made a point to increase our prices, and I'm going to discuss that in a second, but I think over time you should definitely increase your prices, and this should align as you pour more and more value into the community. So currently I'm producing this giant community course. So to justify that, it's like we increased our prices recently and we're continuing to do so. I also, and I believe Emma may have the link, for those of you who are more scientific, this was a really, really interesting framework that one of our members shared, where he was like, basically what you're talking about is somewhat mirrored in this guy's approach. And you can see in the graph at the bottom there, you basically plot a lot of the things I'm talking about, like the high and low range and so on, into a graph, and it intersects and actually shows you where your price should be. And watching it, it was like, okay, this is like a really interesting methodology to back up some of the concepts that I'm talking about. So I recommend giving that a watch. That may help guide your decision as well. And remember, as I say, your price can and should change over time. So what people often do is they get really frozen in indecision. I don't know how many of you have active communities. Maybe some of you are planning to launch and struggling with pricing. But you really don't need to feel like this is a life sentence. Whatever price you pick should increase over time anyway, and should be changed anyway. So this is really about making your best guess, and hopefully some of the lessons that we're covering today help inform that guess. But whatever you pick, it's like, cool, run with it, serve those members. And then if you feel like you want to increase it in future, great, you can. And hopefully that takes some of the pressure out of the decision, because people put so much pressure over getting like the exact right price. And actually it's like, okay, you can just change that, like change it in 3 months if you want, it's fine. I want to touch on, before we kind of open up for any more questions, I just want to share some of the most common pricing mistakes that I see as well. So this is such a common one. People underprice from a place of insecurity. And this is generally from a place of, oh, I feel like I won't be able to attract any members. And the only way I'm going to get all these members in and definitely have a successful launch is to have a super low price. And even though I know this stuff, there's a difference between knowing and doing, because I will admit I was guilty of this too. We did this a couple of years ago when we launched Learn Community. We definitely underpriced. And we basically, when we increase our prices, it's only for new members, so the legacy members are locked in. And some of those founding members are, of course, still with us, and I love them and appreciate them, and they're the OGs that have been there from the start. But I look at the membership fee and think, like, what was I thinking? Like, that was way too low. So yeah, it typically comes from a place of like fear, insecurity around those early member numbers. And my advice to people would be, I genuinely think it's better to try and consider having less members and focus on marketing more effectively. So we launched with around 100 members. In my case, maybe it would have been smart to launch with 30 members, but charge 3 times as much and really focus more on just like driving as much demand as I could and shouting about it and marketing it really well. That would probably be a better approach than just trying to get a ton of people in at a much cheaper rate. Not increasing prices over time. So I touched on this, but the first point is you'll be hit by inflation, which has been sky high recently. So, you know, a lot of us may be entrepreneurs. You know, we do this community stuff for a living, and it's not like being at a day job where hopefully your company is giving you annual reviews and pay rises and stuff like that, so you don't have to worry about this so much. So many entrepreneurs and freelancers just keep their prices static year after year after year, which at the minute means, okay, well, you're earning like 10% less every single year, which sucks. And we start to feel that compound over time. So you should increase it purely for that reason alone. But I also think as you increase the value of the community, the price should correlate with that. And as part of that, it's not just that you're putting more effort and more resources and more stuff in the community, you're also learning more. So as a community leader, as a community founder, you are getting better, hopefully. You're getting better at your craft. Like I said, we've run Learn Community for 2 years, and I know that I do a better job now for our members than I did 2 years ago. And so the price should move in tandem with that.
Quick question on that people seem to be asking in the chat. What do you think is the better approach, raising prices for everyone across the board, or having your existing members continue at their locked-in price that they joined at, and then just increasing the price for new members?
I strongly believe in increasing just for new members. I think there's a few reasons here. First of all, it's a logistical nightmare to increase the current members because, you know, legally, like they signed up at a certain price point. You can't just increase it and not tell them. So generally there needs to be some kind of opt-in on their part. And I think you would actually lose more people to churn, because the nature of community is you have some passive members, some inactive members, and they may not take that action to basically opt into the higher price. And you can't just do it on their behalf. So you're just going to lose a bunch of people and probably be hit financially harder than if you just left them alone. So that's one big reason. I also think that it's a nice gesture. So whenever I increase prices, I like to think that our original members kind of feel nice that like they got in at the price they did and feel good about that. And the third reason is it should technically reduce churn. And I'm still trying to dig into the data around this, but theoretically it makes sense, right? Because you know that if you cancel but then want to come back, you'd have to pay a higher price. So you want to kind of hold on to that better price that you've got historically. So hopefully that answers that question. Cool. Yeah, another common mistake I see is not validating your pricing. So later in the course, as it says here, I've got all kinds of lessons about how to validate your community. But the broad tip I would give today is you want to try and prove some level of demand. So as an example, how I did this with Learn Community is we had a wait list before we launched. And as part of that wait list, we didn't just say, are you interested in the community? Because that's an easy yes. I wanted to get actual commitment from people. So they had to actually select the price or membership plan rather that they were committing to as part of that application. So they would say, yes, I'm going to pay this amount per month. Option 2 was I'll pay this amount per year and I want the annual plan. And option 3, and this is very key, everyone, was sorry, I can't afford either. Because what I noticed was originally we just had options 1 or 2, and we'd message a member and say, great, like you want the annual plan, let's sign you up. And they were like, oh no, I can't afford it, but I just chose one of the options that were there. And when we had option 3, people started putting that, some of them saying I can't afford it. I always kind of wondered, okay, why are you applying to a paid community then? But that's fine. But having that option 3 was a good way to kind of identify people that may or may not be a good fit given your pricing model. So by doing that, I could have a level of confidence that yes, there is demand. Yes, people are willing to pay this price point. And when we launch, I know I'm going to get paying members at that price point. Whereas if you don't have any level of validation, which I do see with some of our members and try and guide them on this, they launch and they go, oh no, like maybe I got my pricing wrong or the demand isn't there, and they get a trickle or don't get any members at all, which can be heart-wrenching. So yeah, validation is definitely your friend. And this is, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but a lot of people just do this because they kind of haven't thought through any frameworks around pricing. So it's like, that number feels about right. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this workshop is I want to try and have these guide rails, like these principles to at least give you a more informed decision. So you're not picking a random number out of thin air. Don't just go by gut, look at the market, look at the various steps, try and think through your financial situation and what makes you excited. And hopefully all of these things combined, you're going to end up at a number where you're like, yeah, I've got a reasonable level of confidence attached to that number. It doesn't feel random anymore. And on that note, thank you so much. And do let me know if anyone has any questions. Because Zoom is still freezing, Emma, I'm afraid I can't read the questions and I can't stop my screen share. I don't know if you're able to, in fact, no,
Yeah, I can definitely read out some questions.
Are you able to stop my screen share as an admin?
Let me see.
Thank you.
Let's check.
I'd love to see everyone's faces.
I'm not seeing an option for that to stop your screen share.
Okay.
But I will definitely read out the questions that are coming through.
Cool. And sorry if anyone wants to unmute as well, feel free. I just can't see everyone's face.
Okay, Frank is asking for guidelines around digits. Is 30 better than 27, better than 29? I think, Frank, correct me if I'm wrong here. I think what you're asking is it better to have a price that's $30 than to have something that's like $27, 29, landing in a round interval that way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, there's been quite considerable research around psychological price points like this. So there is a reason, I think, why often people kind of go for that, that 9. Like what are Circle's current price points, Emma? Most of them end with a 9, I believe, right? For that reason.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's been well proven that is effective. That's why I've always done it. I don't like the 7, and I think it's because it's what the real like markety people use. So when you see people like selling scammy courses and stuff like that, for some reason it always ends in the 7, which doesn't sit right with me. So I think the round number is fine. Some of our members use it. It looks nice and clean, and ultimately I don't think it's going to be the determining factor if someone signs up. But yeah, I just like that kind of psychological principle of like stick a 9 in there, and it looks good.
Totally. Casey is asking, what are your feelings about free trials? When to use them, when to not use them, or should you never use them?
I don't love them for some of the reasons that I outlined with Naomi. I think, honestly, they're very different people. The people that want a free community or a free trial are typically quite different people than the people who are willing to invest in a paid community. A good example of this, Chase Jarvis, who ran Creative Live. He's a very renowned photographer, and I remember him saying, if you're working with $500 clients, paying you $500 for your photography, and you want to be getting $50,000 clients, well, you're not going to be able to convert your $500 client to become a $50,000 client. You need to go find $50,000 clients. I kind of think it the same way with community members. Often it's very hard to convert freebie seekers and people who want a free community to go and start paying you. So I think it's more effective to go and find the people that are willing to pay from the start. I'm not saying it never works. And anytime I do workshops like this, I always want to make the point of, I don't like to give one size fits all advice. So there are always exceptions to the rule. But my experience and the experience of a lot of our members and people in the community space, I have seen mirror that, and I've seen that being widely, reported. I've experienced it myself, and I think probably the only example that springs to mind was an entrepreneurial community I was in, and they only did it when they'd exhausted every other avenue for scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I think often people jump to that as a first option, but I would rather you invested more in marketing and partnerships and outreach and clarifying your value prop and the host of other things you can do to attract members. If you've done all of that perfectly and you still want to push for more and more scale, well, then maybe that's a marketing experiment you can do with a free trial, and you can actually study the numbers of how that translates to growth. But it wouldn't be my first choice.
Definitely. That's my sentiment on it too. Yeah, I think that's a good best practice.
Awesome. Does Naomi have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think there is a psychological trigger. So on our onboarding form, we're offering a free 3-month trial for our first cohort. And after that, you're expected to pay X dollars, right? And so we're hoping that that generates kind of the commitment. We're certain that it won't generate the commitment for everyone, but we have had a few members who have called us or prospective members who have called us and said, listen, I can't afford it beyond the 3 months. Is that okay? Which was great. And we said, no, it's actually not. That's not the intent of the free trial. So we'll see, like TBD, whether it works. I'm also curious what your thinking is. Like, we've gone out with a price. What's your thinking of reducing that price now that we're in the community for a little bit?
Yeah, it's that is an interesting one, right? Because most people do it the other way. They increase. Am I right in thinking you don't yet have any paying members?
No, so we're about to generate our invoice for that first cohort that had their 3-month trial. So now I'm now I'm vacillating. Now I'm like, we go out and say, in our current phase of the journey, we've decided to go out with X price instead of Y price, or given the economic environment, we've decided to go out with X price instead of Y price. Or do we just go for it, and if nobody joins, then we have a bit of a reset? Like, I'm feeling a bit stuck by the pricing part.
Well, I would firstly realize it's a good thing that you're in your position, because it would be terrible if you had some people paying $3,500 and
Yeah.
then you drop the price, and then you would probably have to like refund them or do something to avoid frustration there. You could always do it as a founding member like sale, essentially. So you could say the regular price is 3.5. We're going to charge, $999 or whatever it ends up being.
Yeah.
And there would be some truth in that, right? Because that is your price point and that's your intended price point. But if you have genuine reasons for, and again, I'd be wary of underpricing. So hopefully today has kind of helped solidify a little bit like what an appropriate price should be.
Yeah.
But if you're feeling like it's less than 3.5K, it's like, you technically could do a kind of offer for your founding members, just which should help them to convert and compel them to sign up.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Cool.
We have a question here. Bama's asking approximately how many hours per week do you spend managing your community? And I think your response to this is interesting.
It varies more at the minute for a couple of reasons. So I'm tending to work more in a kind of evenings and weekends capacity, and I always have done, but that has ramped up as of late because I am producing the course. I'm filming that, editing that, shipping that out. So we release a module every single week, which has been quite full on. And as a result of doing the course, we've got like a flurry of new signups that have happened, which is very exciting. But I'm very hands-on with like personally welcoming every new member and that kind of thing. So it's been quite a lot. I would say it's a flexible range, but at the minute it's basically like after dinner every evening and then some weekend hours, if that helps. But for anyone who's doing a community as a side hustle, it can be a grind, but it's also very rewarding. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about how to kind of manage their time and do that kind of stuff. Because I get a lot of messages from our members being like, how is this possible? This seems like a full-time exercise. And if you're like really smart with your time, I think it is possible.
Totally. Maybe we have time for one last question here. Adrian is asking, what is your opinion on creating free community spaces to build a large audience in order to start selling premium courses inside? Adrian, maybe you could share a little bit more context.
I think I get the question.
Okay.
I'm happy if they want to share more context, but I've actually had variants of this question from our members. It's almost like, how do I leverage community to build an audience to then convert to paying members? My answer tends to be there's better and more scalable ways to build an audience than inside a community platform. So I would often advocate that they, build a presence on social, that they grow a newsletter, that they do all of these things that are infinitely much more scalable. So when I email my 6,000 newsletter subscribers, that's a lot less work than it is to run a free community that has 6,000 free members in that I'm trying to convert to a paid membership. It's like a completely different ballpark. And so yeah, it's that's my broad answer. I do I've talked in some of my content about how you can leverage things like Facebook, even though I do not like Facebook groups. You can leverage them sometimes to siphon people to a paid community on something like Circle. So, for example, one of our members runs a modern ragdoll community on Circle. And Circle is, I'm not just saying this as a Circle expert, obviously far superior to Facebook, because Facebook has all kinds of problems. But one of the positive things about it can be discoverability. So she optimized her free group around modern ragdoll making, got thousands of members signing up for the free group because they discovered her through search. And then she used that free group to then bring over paid members to help her grow her business in her Circle community. So that's a kind of exception to the rule. But most of the time when people are talking about doing this, I'm like, you do not realize how much work that's going to be, because trying to build your entire audience on a community platform is just, it's a lot. So yeah, go build audience a traditional way would be my feedback.
For sure. Great advice to end on. I know we are a little bit over time here, so I will be uploading the replay of this event to our video library, hopefully by end of day tomorrow, so that you can revisit all these great frameworks and ideas we talked about today. But thank you so much, Tom. This was really demystifying. I think it helped a lot of folks really help solidify what they're going to do in terms of pricing, or at least give them questions and frameworks to work through. So thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting. It's always fun hanging out, and thank you everyone for giving up your time today to join us. I hope it was valuable, and yeah, I'll see you in the Circle forum.